I am Lena Hartley, 36 years old. I once believed that if I stayed polite, never complained, and quietly did my part, I would never be forgotten. But then I received a wedding invitation with my name already printed as Maid of Honor, a decision no one had asked me about. Don't pick something that clashes. And I understood sometimes they don't need you to leave, they only need you to stand still long enough to become the background. I've always thought names should feel heavier than they do. Mine slips too easily from memory, like a tea bag left too long in water, present but pale. It disappears mid-sentence, spoken out of habit more than intention. I used to imagine it stitched somewhere permanent. Somewhere it could stay. The message came just after I rinsed the cup. A soft buzz on the counter. I didn't rush to check it. I already knew it wouldn't be urgent. No one sends emergencies to me. It was from Molly, my cousin on my mother's side, the kind who never writes unless something needs forwarding. She'd attached a screenshot of a group chat. I tapped it. Thumb paused at the title, Whitlow Family Gathering. There were 10 names listed at the top, including hers. Mine wasn't one of them. The message itself was short. Sunday at 2 p.m. Bring something sweet if you can, Caleb likes pecan pie. No greeting, no mention of who was organizing it. No indication of who had already confirmed. The group had been active for days. I scrolled back through the thread. Recipes exchanged, seating suggestions, jokes about who would be late, an RSVP list forming at the bottom of a reply from Aunt Linda. Maggie, my mother, had already replied. We'll bring iced tea and folding chairs. I'll not Franklin and I. Just we, as if the unit were already understood and complete. I tapped my mother's name, opened a separate thread and typed, Hi. Just saw Molly's message. Was this planned recently? The response arrived after 2 minutes. We figured you were probably busy. Didn't want to impose. 7 words, 1 full stop. I reread the message. Not you weren't invited, just we assumed you had something better to do. No apology, no curiosity. I didn't reply. The rest of the evening moved around me like furniture I had stopped noticing. I boiled water, let it sit, forgot it. Took a call from Claire and didn't mention the message. Folded laundry that had been in the basket since Saturday. When I pulled the last shirt from the bottom, a thin white envelope fell out, something I'd tucked between sleeves and forgotten. A letter from last December, unopened with my name spelled wrong on the front. I recognized my father's handwriting. I didn't open it. 3 days passed, no follow-up. On the 4th day, a thick yellow envelope arrived through the mail slot with my name correct this time, typed in a business font. There was a post-it stuck to the front. Need this signed for refinancing Caleb's place. Just a formality. Uncle H inside was a property consent form. The condo they were referring to was one I had helped co-sign when Caleb was finishing med school. Not because I was asked, but because I happened to be the only one with a credit rating strong enough to help push the loan through. I'd been told once briefly, and never updated since. My name appeared at the bottom of the page in small print like a watermark. The owner section had only his name now. Mine was still needed, but only as a ghost signature. Nothing else. There was no mention of the gathering. No line saying, see you Sunday. No line asking how I was. I folded the paper in half and left it on the table. Later that evening, I microwaved soup and sat on the couch, watching Maple twitch in her sleep. The little bell on her collar jingled each time her leg kicked. She didn't wake up. She trusted the quiet. Claire called again around 9. I didn't tell her about the letter. I didn't tell her about the group chat. I just listened as she talked about someone at her firm who had forwarded an email chain out of order. We both laughed at the absurdity of adults being undone by reply all. But somewhere between the laughter, I could hear her voice slowing. "They forgot to add you again, didn't they?" It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. Instead, I got up and took down the small frame on my kitchen shelf. Inside was a black and white photograph of me, age 6, standing beside a birthday cake. No other faces. I'd always thought of the photo as nostalgic proof that once I had been the center of something. But lately it felt more like a record of absence. The room behind me was empty. No hands reaching in with forks, no blurred silhouettes, just me, candlelight, and the silence behind it. That Sunday came. The sun rose behind the blinds and stayed all day. I made coffee, ignored the phone. Molly posted a photo later that evening, everyone seated in the backyard lawn chairs, lined up like punctuation marks. My mother wore a cardigan I hadn't seen before. My father stood behind Caleb with one hand on his shoulder. The caption read, "Family days are the best days." I didn't click to enlarge. The next morning, my mother messaged again. "Hope your weekend was restful. Gathering was nice." Elizabeth made her spinach dip Caleb's favorite. I typed, "Sounds lovely," and left it at that. The envelope still sat on my table. I'd placed a coaster on top of it, not out of meaning, but because it was there. The coaster was a gift from a conference I'd attended last fall, thick cork with the words, "Human First Design," printed in white block letters. It looked out of place against the manila yellow of the legal form beneath it. That night, I opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out the teacup with the hairline crack. It was a gift from someone I no longer spoke to. I filled it halfway, watched the steam catch the light, then carried it to the windowsill. Outside, someone on the street was playing music, something instrumental and slow, not loud enough to name, just enough to notice. I remembered something small, a conversation years ago. My father had been driving me back to the airport after a quick holiday visit. He'd asked, without looking, "Why don't you just work with people instead of machines?" I'd been quiet then too. They still don't know what I do. Not really. Not why I moved. Not what I've built since. And I've stopped offering it. Claire once told me that invisibility isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's the natural result of being the only one who isn't pretending. I didn't sign the form. I didn't return the call from Uncle Howard. I didn't send a message to Molly. That week, I bought a plant with thick, whack leaves and no flowers. I placed it beside the window near the cracked cup. It didn't ask for sunlight, just space. I gave it that. Quietly. Without ceremony. I used to think that if I left space for everyone else, there'd still be a corner left for me. Every Thanksgiving I flew in early before the others arrived. I unpacked chairs from the garage, ironed tablecloths that had been folded too long, ran to the store for things my mother had forgotten she needed. She never made a list, only pointed from room to room. The gold-rimmed plates are in the cabinet, careful they're real china. And the cranberry sauce this year needs cloves. No one else arrived until noon. The year Caleb brought home his first serious girlfriend, I offered to sleep on the pull-out so they could have the upstairs guest room. My back ached for days. No one mentioned it. When they left, she hugged my mother and said, "You raised such a wonderful son." I stood near the door holding her coat. I cancelled a conference trip once Boston mid-February, so I could attend Caleb's valedictory speech. He'd practiced for weeks, printed his note cards on thick matte paper, with his name embossed in the corner. Afterward, he hugged our parents near the stage. I stood off to the side holding his coat again. My father turned to me in the parking lot. "Nice of you to come," He'll remember that. I doubt he did. There was a stretch, maybe 6 months, when I called every Sunday evening, just after dinner, before everyone settled into separate screens. I kept the conversations short, asked about the garden, listened to updates about Caleb's rotations. My mother once mentioned the neighbour's son had taken up violin again. She never asked what I did at work. One week I told her I'd been invited to join a design ethics panel. There was a pause. Then, "Those are unpaid, right?" I sent her flowers for her birthday that year. Pale yellow lilies in a glass vase. The message card was handwritten, not typed. 3 days later, she called. They arrived in one piece. "But, lilies, sweetheart. You know I prefer pink roses." The next year, I sent nothing. She didn't mention it. When my grandfather became too weak to stand alone, they needed someone to be home during the day. Caleb was in the city for his residency. My parents both worked full schedules. I was freelancing that spring between roles, flexible, just until we find someone, my mother said. It wouldn't be long. I stayed 3 months, cooked soft food, changed linens, listened to the same story about the same childhood dog every other night. I kept notes about his medication taped to the fridge. When he passed, my father spoke at the funeral. He mentioned Caleb's piano recital, how Grandad had cried during the final song. He didn't mention the woman who'd held his hand that morning. Afterward, over coffee and catered muffins, Aunt Linda patted my arm. "You were always so practical, the kind of daughter who doesn't need attention to do what's right." I smiled. It was easier than explaining that I'd stopped expecting thank yous. I used to handwrite Christmas cards, one for each household signed in blue ink, with little notes tucked inside. I added recent photos, thoughtful gifts from Seattle. One year I bought matching bookmarks etched with their initials. I never received a reply, not even a message. When finally stopped sending them, no one asked why. There was a phone call once, early spring. Caleb's voice came through the line loose and distracted. "You're good with money stuff, right? Elizabeth and I are trying to sort out our savings. She thinks we should invest in a condo, but I told her you'd probably say to wait. I offered to help budget research anything concrete." He chuckled. "No offense, but I told her you were more of a support person. You know, good at background stuff. Logistics." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I heard Elizabeth's voice in the background. He ended the call without waiting for my answer. In family group photos, I always stood at the end, just off-center, close enough to crop. I wore safe colors, navy gray, slate blue, nothing that might draw a remark. I arrived on time, stood where they told me, smiled as instructed. Once at a 4th of July party, my mother tapped the sleeve of my blouse. "You should really try something softer. That cut makes your shoulders look wide." I folded it at the back of my closet when I got home. Never wore it again. I never confronted anyone. Never raised my voice or wrote long letters explaining how I felt. I thought dignity was quieter than that. I thought making peace meant making room. I thought if I were steady, unobtrusive good, they would notice how easily I fit into the shape they'd drawn for me. But the shape kept shrinking. One day I looked around and realized no one had asked if I still wanted to be inside it. And I hadn't said no. Not because I agreed, but because I thought if I said nothing, they would understand. I used to think that being remembered meant being important. When I turned 8, the plan was to have my birthday at the park near the rose garden. My father promised to book the picnic tables. My mother had picked out pale green paper napkins with little daisies printed in the corners. I told my friends at school. That morning, Caleb had a last-minute track meet. It wasn't on the calendar before. They all got into the car and left the cake in the freezer. I stayed behind with Mrs. Boone, who sang Happy Birthday off-key while slicing a thawed vanilla sheet cake into uneven rectangles. She gave me the biggest piece. I didn't finish it. I kept one of the napkins. It's still folded in a box under my bed. No frosting, just a faint grease mark where the cake once sat. Years later, I was offered a summer research fellowship in New York. Only 5 students in the region were selected. It came with a stipend housing and access to university labs I'd only seen in brochures. I printed the acceptance letter and left it on the kitchen table. My mother saw it that evening. "That's very exciting," she said, glancing over it. "But we can't drive you. July's a terrible month. Too many conferences. I booked my own bus ticket and dragged my suitcase up 6 flights of dorm stairs. No one called to check if I'd arrived. At the end of that summer, I mailed home a copy of my first published abstract. I never heard whether they received it. My father once introduced me to someone at a fundraiser. "She's in tech," he said. "Brilliant with systems designing machines or networks." I can't keep up. Something to do with software, I think. I was standing right beside him. In college, I won a national award for research on inclusive UI frameworks. There was a formal reception, framed certificates, and a press release. I reserved 2 front-row seats with my parents' names printed on the place cards. I kept checking the entrance before they closed the doors. The seats stayed empty. Afterward, I found a voicemail. Caleb had a last-minute interview for a surgical internship. They had to help him prepare. A few weeks later, my mother called about a friend's daughter who got into dental school. "She's doing so well. You remember Hannah, right? You should congratulate her." I said nothing about the award. Once I spoke at a small campus lecture series. Nothing grand, just 10 students, a chalkboard, and a projector that flickered when the fan kicked in. The school posted a photo online. I wore a wrinkled grey blouse and jeans. In the picture, my hands were mid-gesture, explaining something about user empathy. That same week, my cousin Grace got engaged. My mother shared her announcement on Facebook with a line about how our girls are becoming women. She didn't mention the lecture. I'm not sure she saw it. I found the photo again months later. I almost deleted it. Instead, I saved it in a folder labeled neutral. In the hallway of my parents' house, there's a collage of family snapshots, vacations, graduations, weddings, Caleb's white coat ceremony. One picture has me standing at the far right, partially out of frame. You can only see half my face. The photo is mounted behind glass. No one ever bothered to replace it. At my cousin's wedding, the MC announced the bridal party. "Let's welcome Linda Whitlow, sister of the groom." No one corrected him. I was already halfway down the aisle. Later that evening, I sat near the dessert table, listening to someone praise Caleb's steadiness, his dedication. They said he was the kind of son who always made time. My mother walked past, pausing just long enough to say, "Try not to leave crumbs, dear. The photographers are still around." I brushed off the front of my dress and folded my napkin tightly in my lap. That one had roses on it, not daisies. There was a time I was called to the stage during a departmental banquet acknowledgement for a research team that had pushed a product prototype through early testing. When they read my name, the microphone buzzed slightly, and I thought for a second they'd skipped over it. I stood anyway. Afterward, I texted my mother. Mild recognition tonight. Project past review. The reply came hours later. "I'm at the hospital. Internal audit this week. Hope you're keeping warm." She didn't ask what the project was. I stopped telling them after that. At home, I kept a drawer of small things, postcards from past conferences, thank you notes from students, a name tag with the lanyard still attached. Not because I needed the reminders, but because they were mine. No one else had touched them. I once brought that drawer's contents to a family dinner, folded into a small portfolio. My intention was vague. I don't remember why I thought anyone would want to see. I placed it on the dining table before the plates arrived. My father glanced at it once. "Is this for work? Maybe leave it for later. Caleb's got some big news. He had bought a new car. They all wanted to see pictures." I left the folder there until after dessert. No one opened it. In a cabinet near my desk, there's a mug with chipped enamel. The inside is stained with old tea. The handle has a slight wobble. I reach for it often, not because it's beautiful, but because it never pretended to be. Some things don't need to be whole to feel familiar, and sometimes a name doesn't have to be missing to feel erased. It only needs to be ignored. Repeatedly. Quietly. Until it becomes easier not to say it at all. I used to think the past could hold its shape if I stayed quiet long enough. The house on Sycamore Lane still appears in my dreams, as it was paint chipping on the porch rails, the smell of lemon floor polish near the back door, the faded quilt folded across the arm of the couch. My grandmother kept a small porcelain lamp on the windowsill above the sink. It only turned on with a tap. I remember how lightly I had to press, too soft. Nothing happened. Too firm and the bulb would flicker out. I thought that meant it listened to me more carefully than it listened to them. After she died, no one came to the house except me. I stayed for 17 days, sorted clothing into donation bags, labeled boxes with uneven handwriting, laid the quilt over the back of the couch again because it felt wrong to leave that spot bare. I wrapped the lamp in newspaper and brought it back with me. It's lived in 4 apartments since then. Still turns on with the same small touch. Last week, a message arrived through an account I hadn't used in years. A classmate from high school. Saw Caleb's name on the county records. Guess the house is his now. Beautiful. To keep it in the family. I stared at the screen for a while, then typed back a single word. Thanks. Afterward, I opened the county database. The deed had been transferred 3 months earlier. Caleb Whitlow listed as sole title holder. No co-owner, no mention of a trust, no record of revision. I didn't appear at all. In my grandmother's will, the house had been placed into a special trust. My name had once been on a secondary clause language like first right of residence and non-commercial inheritance. I remember underlining it in blue ink when the papers arrived. I never signed anything to forfeit it. The next morning, I called my mother. She sounded alert, rested. She must have had time to think about how she would phrase it. "We assumed you wouldn't be interested. You've built something elsewhere." I asked when the transfer happened. Last spring, I believe. Caleb needed something stable. "And you've always had your own way." I reminded her that I'd lived in the house longer than anyone after Gran passed, that I'd kept the power on, shoveled the snow, paid for the minor repairs. She didn't deny it. She changed the subject. "You were always more practical than attached. It didn't seem like a loss to you. No apology. Not even the kind people give when they think they're being polite. Just a small erasure, spoken flatly." Later that day, Caleb texted, "Hope you're not upset. We figured it made sense. You've got your life. I need a place to start mine." There was no greeting, no question, just statement, justification, and punctuation left off like a breath not finished. A week passed. Then a manila envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a photocopy of the transfer deed. The signature at the bottom belonged to my father, Franklin Whitlow, as designated legal representative. A sticky note clung to the top corner. Just for your records in case anything tax-related comes up. Hope all's well. Dad. No mention of the house's name, no reference to Sycamore, not even a line about memories. Just tax-related. I unfolded the pages slowly, the notary stamp cut through the bottom like a watermark official, grey, irreversible. My name didn't appear once, not as former resident, not as legal heir, not even as daughter. That evening, Claire came by with a paper bag of apples and a bundle of scallions tied with a rubber band. She placed them gently on the counter. Her eyes passed over the open envelope and landed on the notepad beside it. She didn't say anything. She never did when something was still fresh. I boiled water and poured it into the chipped teapot I keep for quiet company. The steam traced upward without force. I watched it disappear. When I was 11, I painted wildflowers across the inside wall of the backyard shed. I'd mixed paints with dish soap to stretch the color. My grandmother didn't repaint it. She showed it to guests. Called it Lena's Field. I visited 3 years ago. The shed had been torn down. There was a gravel rectangle in its place. Smooth. Functional. That same trip I found the rusted garden spade she used to wedge the screen door open. It was lying beneath a pile of wood, forgotten. I took it home in my suitcase wrapped in an old towel. It sits in the corner of my balcony now, beside a pot of lavender that refuses to bloom. A few days after the envelope, my father called. I trust you received the documents. He didn't ask what I thought of them. It made sense to do it that way. Less friction. Your name complicates things legally. I didn't interrupt. Besides, Caleb's the one who can manage upkeep. You're busy. He cleared his throat. The sound was measured. You've never been one for roots. When I was 19, he told me over dinner, you're good at follow-through, not vision. That's why Caleb gets the big ideas. I remember pushing my peas across the plate, wondering when doing the work had stopped haunting. No one told me they were removing me. No one asked if I still kept the porch key in my nightstand, or if I'd noticed the upstairs window frame had begun to rot. They had stopped imagining me inside that house, long before I'd stopped hoping they might. After the call, I opened the storage box beneath my bed. Inside, a green napkin folded neatly, the copy of my first grant award, a dried pansy pressed between 2 sheets of wax paper, and the note my grandmother once tucked into my coat pocket. It read, "Some spaces don't need claiming, they just need returning to." I stared at that line for a long time. Not everything needs a name to be lost. Some things disappear the moment someone else decides you're no longer part of the picture. I folded the deed carefully, placed it into the box, and slid it closed. The lamp on the kitchen counter flickered as I passed. I left it off. I once believed that silence meant absence. I know better now. I removed myself from the group thread at 6:42 in the morning, not because of anything specific they'd written that day, but because the notifications no longer belonged to me. I tapped Leave Conversation and set the phone face down. There was no warning before the exit, no auto message to alert the others. Just one fewer participant. I doubted they noticed. The Christmas list I kept on my desk, names, addresses, notes about last year's wrapping preferences, went into the drawer without folding. I didn't throw it away. I just stopped reaching for it. The note cards stayed in their box, the ink pen dried slightly at the tip. I let it. A reminder popped up on my calendar, order Mom's lilies by 12:14. I deleted it without opening the florist's website. Aunt Linda left a voicemail about a brunch next month. Something about the cousins, something about planning. Her voice was the same clipped brightness she used on holiday calls, the kind that came before asking for something. I listened once, and didn't save it. The icon stayed red for 3 days before I cleared it out. I wrapped the spare house key in parchment paper and slid it into a plain envelope. No return address, no card. The mailbox near my office was always quiet in the afternoon. I dropped it through the slot without slowing down. At work, I changed my conference travel preference. The annual design retreat rotated cities, and Chicago was on the list for spring. I marked myself as unavailable. No reason listed, no follow-up from HR. On social media, I began unfollowing quietly. No blocking, no announcements, just small disappearances, one by one. I left Caleb's wedding page until last. A digital photo of the invitation sat pinned at the top, scripted fonts in navy and cream. Lena Marie Whitlow, Maid of Honor. The title had been typed long before anyone had asked if I'd accept it. I clicked unfollow. The screen refreshed. The invitation vanished. In the evening, I walked past the drawer where the old photographs were kept. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. Summer Polaroids with the corners curling. Graduation shots with names embossed in gold. A birthday where I wasn't in the frame, just a sliver of sleeve near the cake. I didn't throw them away. I moved them to a digital folder titled Archive. I didn't lock it. I just didn't return. There was a time I would have made a chart of gifts, a list of reminders, a strategy for staying visible. I once believed that effort could be interpreted as love, that quietness was grace, that waiting was a kind of virtue. Now, I simply don't respond. Megan texted, "Are you coming back in December? Everyone's asking." I typed, "Not this year." I didn't add a reason. She didn't press. Claire noticed I'd turned off my phone during dinner. She didn't comment, but later reached across the table and adjusted the napkin on my lap, as if reminding me I was still here. I received a holiday card from one of the cousins. Gold lettering. Matching sweaters. From all of us. To you! There was no handwritten message. I placed it unopened in the recycling bin. At the grocery store, the clerk asked if I wanted stamps. I shook my head. She smiled and asked if I had anything festive planned. I said, "Not this year." My voice didn't falter. The office gift exchange came and went. I contributed a candle in a blue ceramic holder. Someone picked it without comment. I received a pair of socks printed with cartoon dogs. I wore them the next day. I began waking up without checking messages. I no longer scanned my inbox for subject lines with family or reminder in them. The silence made room for other things without obligation. A neighbor knocked one evening offering cookies from a new recipe. I opened the door and said, "Thank you." No one had ever knocked just to give before. I stood there holding the tin long after she'd gone, wondering why that small gesture felt so unfamiliar. At night, I placed a single ceramic dish by the sink, the one with the faint crack beneath the glaze. I washed it gently and set it on a towel to dry. No other plates needed space. Once my father told me I was distant by design. "You never needed anyone. That's why you fade." I remember his voice as he said it, steady and efficient, like an accountant reciting figures. It wasn't meant as an insult. That's what made it last. I used to argue in my head. I don't anymore. I simply no longer answer the call. I no longer send things in advance. I no longer keep extra chairs in the coat closet just in case someone shows up. I no longer leave messages unanswered in the hope they'll try again. I have chosen the quieter path, not because it's painless, but because it's real. Because it no longer depends on being understood. There is no announcement, no declaration, No dramatic exit. There is only what I no longer do, and what I choose quietly not to undo. I used to think a temporary place couldn't hold real shape. The apartment on the corner of Aloha and 15th had been meant for 3 months, 6 at most. Just until the contract stabilized, just until I figured out if I'd be staying. That was 2.5 years ago. The lease renews automatically now, and the woman in the leasing office calls me by name. The window in the living room faces west. I didn't notice at first, but the light touches the brick wall across the alley each evening in a way that softens everything else. I keep a folding chair by the ledge, and sometimes place a single glass of wine there, not for ceremony, but for routine. Maple knows the route through Volunteer Park better than I do. She leads with quiet confidence, turning left by the moss-covered bench, pausing at the base of the statue where pigeons always linger. We walk early before the joggers. The grass is often damp and the sky still undecided. The old man with the red knit cap nods each morning. His dog is blind in one eye. A woman with silver hair brings biscuits in a tin and never stays to chat. A boy in mismatched shoes once pointed to Maple and called her a lion. His father smiled but didn't correct him. I didn't know their names not for the first 6 weeks, but now I do. There's no holiday rotation in this building, no sibling gift drawer, no questions about who's bringing what, just quiet comings and goings, polite hallway greetings, the shuffle of packages being signed for downstairs. I once forgot my keys and buzzed the wrong neighbor by mistake. She let me in anyway without asking who I was visiting. Each Thursday I help teach a coding basics class at the community center. It's mostly girls between 12 and 15. I show them how to write clean loops, how to comment clearly, how to build something that doesn't break just because it's simple. They don't ask where I work full-time. They ask if I know how to build a website that tracks moon phases. I never told my parents about the class. They wouldn't have disapproved. They just wouldn't have thought it counted. Ben gave me the cactus as a thank you. Small ceramic pot, one curved arm already tilting. He said it needed very little to survive. I placed it on my desk beside the receipt from the hardware store and the pen I still use to cross out old names. It's grown crooked, but green. The bookshelf in the hallway used to hold old binders labeled with things like family, finances, and travel plans. Now it holds novels I bought secondhand, one framed photo of me and Claire at the pier, and a glass jar full of buttons. Some I've never used. Some don't match anything anymore. I bought the frame myself. Matte, black, no design. It felt oddly personal to choose something just for permanence. No one's in the picture but us. No arms cropped out. No neutral background for blending in. I've stopped organizing things by holidays. The drawer labeled Thanksgiving decor is now just extra linens. I no longer bookmark recipes based on who's visiting. Most nights, I cook simple things, roasted vegetables, rice with lemon soup. I freeze in jars. I eat slowly, sometimes with music, sometimes not. Claire once joked that my fridge looks curated. I told her I only buy what I want to see again. The mug I reach for most has a chip in the handle. I turn it just right when I drink so my thumb rests above the floor. I don't mind it anymore. It reminds me that usefulness doesn't require wholeness. Once a client asked where I was originally from. I paused longer than I meant to. Seattle feels more mine than anywhere else, but... I answered with the name of a town I no longer visit, said flatly, like reciting an outdated mailing address. He nodded and moved on. I haven't updated my emergency contact. There are still moments that feel unfastened. Walking through a store during seasonal displays, hearing someone refer to going home for the weekend, seeing a child with a suitcase waiting outside baggage claim, looking around for someone whose name they don't need to say aloud. But the wait doesn't linger, not like it used to. I've started sleeping with the window cracked, just enough to hear the city exhale. Not for company, just to prove I'm not waiting. At work, I changed my email signature, removed the phone number no one used, kept only my name. No titles, no links. I walk to the post office now not because I need stamps, but because I like the feeling of finishing something without needing it acknowledged. Aunt Linda sent a message last week. Hope you're well. Miss hearing from you. Everyone asks after you. I read it once and placed the phone on the table. I didn't delete it. I didn't answer. I refilled Maple's bowl, straightened the spine of the book beside my chair, watered the cactus with a teaspoon. The light on the western wall stayed soft for longer than usual. I watched it stretch, then fade. And for once, I didn't move to catch it. I used to believe silence meant the door was closed, but sometimes silence is just the pause before a transaction. The call came just after 8. I didn't recognize the number, but the area code gave it away. I let it ring through the first time. On the second, I answered. Not out of curiosity, just to end the sound. There's a wedding, came the voice. No greeting, no shift in tone. My father's voice had always been shaped like a closing argument, measured even just firm enough to keep distance but not suspicion. Elizabeth is Walter Aldridge's daughter, he continued. There'll be a full press presence. Family portraits. We need everyone in place. Not we want, not we hope, just need. He didn't ask if I was well. He didn't mention the months, without contact the key I had mailed back the missed holidays. He moved directly to logistics as if I'd been on hold this whole time, waiting for instructions. Before I could answer, he added, You'll receive the itinerary. And don't be difficult, Lena. This isn't about you. I didn't reply. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, an image popped up in my messages. A silver dress, floor-length with stiff pleats, and a neckline that didn't suit me. Your size should still be the same. The message read. No name attached, but the photo came from my mother's number. A second message followed. Don't wear anything off-tone. This family values unity. I left it unread. Later that evening, I received a card. Heavy cardstock embossed. The kind meant to imply heritage. My name was printed in the corner. Lena Marie Whitlow, Maid of Honor. No one had asked. I held it between my fingers for a long time. Not because I was deciding. Just because it felt like a summary. Caleb messaged next. Don't turn this into something. Just show up, smile and leave if you want. You know how people talk. He didn't say, I want you there. He didn't say, missed you. He said, people. They needed me in the frame, not at the table. Aunt Meredith followed with a voicemail. You don't want to embarrass the family. It's just one day. Everyone will be watching. Uncle Grant chimed in. You've made your point. No need to drag it further. Even my cousin Henry, who once cried in the basement because he broke my CD player, texted, Are you really skipping this? Caleb's going to be CEO someday. You'll look petty. No one asked why I had left. They only noticed the space when it disrupted the aesthetic. I flipped the invitation over. On the back, a note printed in italics, reception, immediately following ceremony. Formal attire required. All family will be presented. Presented, like place settings, or exhibits. I didn't answer any of them, but the calls didn't stop. On Wednesday, my father sent an email. Subject line, urgent trust and inheritance, clause review. Inside was a PDF attachment, a scanned document highlighted in yellow. The language was dry but familiar. My name had been replaced in a paragraph referencing default beneficiaries. At the bottom, a typed sentence. Please advise by Friday to retain current terms. No, dear Lena. No closing line. It read like any other negotiation. The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I printed the page and folded it into quarters. I placed it inside a drawer next to the cactus Ben had given me, its arms now taller than when I first got it. At the bottom of the inbox, buried beneath newsletters and reminders, was a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Elise, a friend from college. The subject line was simply, "Saw your name on the registry," she wrote. "So glad you're part of the wedding. You always said you hated matching dresses. Guess some things change." I closed the browser. The room felt the same. At the community center, one of the girls asked if I ever wore dresses with sequins. I told her no. She asked if I had sisters. I paused, then said, "I used to." Claire called and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I told her I had decided not to attend a wedding. That was all. She didn't ask which one. The silver dress arrived by courier. No note inside. Just a dry cleaning receipt. I hung it behind the door and didn't touch it again. They weren't inviting me back. They were editing me in. The wedding wasn't about reunion. It was choreography. I had been assigned a mark, told to wear the right costume, smile without sound, appear without meaning. There was never an apology, only rehearsal. I picked up the invitation once more, ran my thumb over my name, correctly spelled this time. Sharp black ink on cream paper, no indentations, no weight behind the words. They wanted my image, not my presence. And I understood finally that some requests are not invitations. They are instructions. I folded the card in half and placed it back in the envelope. Not out of anger, just because I was no longer accepting roles. I no longer brace for echoes that don't return. The morning light stretched differently across the room, not warmer, not softer, just more certain. I had replaced the window frame myself. The edges weren't perfectly smooth, but the paint was even, and the hinges didn't stick. I liked knowing it didn't come that way. It had been chosen, carried, fitted, corrected. I filled the space beneath it with a narrow bench I found at a second-hand store walnut, with uneven legs I sanded down. Maple curls up beside it most afternoons, nose pressed to the slats. "I think she likes the draft," I let her. "She's not meant to sit stiffly." There's a photograph taped to the wall now, just above my desk. A group of us standing shoulder to shoulder, half laughing, half squinting in the sun. We'd just finished the last session of a summer mentorship camp at Horizon. My badge still hangs from the edge of the pinboard, creased, faint ink. Someone had drawn a smiley face next to my name with a pink Sharpie. I never erased it. Next to it, I've tacked up my diploma. For years, I kept it in a sleeve under my bed. Now it's framed. Black wood, plain glass. It doesn't shine. I didn't want it to. I don't hear from them anymore, not directly. Occasionally a message comes through a mutual contact. Aunt Meredith's forwarded post. A newsletter from the church in Oakwood listing a family donation. A tag in someone's album where my name appears but isn't linked. Claire stopped by with coffee last week. She wore a cardigan I once lent her and never asked to return. "If they saw you now," she said quietly, "really saw you." "What do you think they'd say?" I wrapped both hands around my mug. There was a chip in the rim I hadn't fixed. They wouldn't recognize me. They're still looking for someone who waited. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The cactus on my desk has started blooming just one flower, pale and precise at the very top. Ben left it months ago when he moved apartments. No note, just a square plastic pot with soil that never needed too much. I've watched it without expecting. The day I submitted the paperwork to change my name, I walked the envelope to the post office. No rush delivery. No tracking request. Just a regular stamp and my signature, written in tight, careful letters. Lena Hartley. Hartley was my grandmother's name. She once told me that quiet women often build the strongest walls not to keep others out, but to remember where they end. I used to think she meant solitude. Now, I think she meant definition. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the change. I don't think they'd notice unless someone asked them to write it down. Caleb's wedding photos were released in a gallery last month, the ones I was meant to be in. I saw them by accident while looking up an unrelated article. They stood in a perfect row, smiling, aligned, curated. Beside them, an image of the Aldridge family, 4 generations in matching linen. My name wasn't tagged in any. Of course it wasn't. They'd found someone else to fill the space, or adjusted the angle until it seemed full. No one called to explain. No one apologized for printing my name beneath a title I hadn't accepted. I was asked last week to serve on a youth technology advisory board. An email from a woman I met briefly at a conference who said she remembered my talk about design ethics. I read her message twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because it felt quiet, the kind of recognition that doesn't need spotlight. I forwarded the invitation to my work account, printed it, and pinned it beside the photo. None of them know about that role, or the talk I gave, or the article in the trade magazine that quoted my name without mispronunciation. I ordered a new nameplate for my desk. It doesn't say Whitlow anymore. The letters on Hartley sit evenly without curve or hesitation. When I hung the last frame in my hallway, I realized there were no family portraits. Not because I had removed them. I'd simply never put them up. I had once been afraid of looking incomplete. Now the walls don't need explaining. Claire asked if I wanted to host a small dinner next month, just the girls from the team, nothing big. I said yes, but made no plans yet. I don't plan from a place of proving anymore. I bought a dark green bowl at a local pottery stand, a soft ridge running through it like a thumbprint. I eat from it often. It's the first piece of dishware I chose, not because it matched something, but because it didn't. In my wallet, my ID bears the new name. I don't pull it out often, but when I do, I see it printed in capital letters that no one else gave me. I still drink the same coffee in the morning, still walk maple along the same path. But I don't wait for messages. I don't check who's looked. I don't leave the door ajar just in case. There are no missing pieces. There is only what I decided to carry forward. And I've made peace with the fact that being unrecognized by them isn't erasure. It's proof that I no longer fit inside the frame they built. I used to sign my name with careful loops, afraid of running out of space at the end of the line. There was a rhythm to it. First, the L tilted just enough to seem deliberate, then the way the E floated into the N without hesitation. But the A always made me pause, a letter I never liked, too round, too exposed. And after that came the part that didn't belong to me, the surname pressed into legal forms, school records, monogrammed towels. I'd learned to make it quick, just 3 slanted slashes and a crooked O. When the legal paperwork arrived, I didn't read it twice. I only checked that my new name was spelled the way my grandmother used to write it on library slips. Hartley. Always in capital letters, always with a blue pen that never smudged. The woman at the clerk's office wore a name tag that read, Joan. She looked like someone who had never changed anything in her life. Still, she handed me the form without a second glance. I brought my own pen. No ceremony, no camera, just a new line across the bottom, Lena Elaine Hartley. I looked at it for a moment longer than necessary, then flipped the page. I didn't tell them in person. A single email went out from my personal account, the one they never used, except when forwarding tax documents or booking flights they needed me to pay for. All matters concerning inheritance or property should be directed to my legal representative. As of today, I no longer use the name Whitlow. No attachment, no apology, no story. Claire leaned on my kitchen counter the next evening, spinning the stem of her wine glass between her fingers. "They'll still go through with the wedding, you know." I nodded. "The pictures will still be taken. Speeches will still be made. You just won't be in any of them." I opened the envelope I had left untouched since morning. Inside were 3 things the invitation I never accepted, the house key I hadn't used in over a year, and a thin silver chain that once belonged to my mother. I never asked to be in the picture. The next morning, I stood in line at the post office behind a woman holding a baby and a man holding a blueprint. I had written the address by hand, block letters, no return name. When it was my turn, I slid the padded envelope forward. "Anything fragile, liquid, or perishable?" the clerk asked. "No." "Anything of value?" "Not anymore." She placed the tracking sticker without comment. "There are no family photos in my new apartment. Not because I hate the past, but because I no longer want it staged in front of me. On my desk, beside a tin of dried lavender and a cup filled with colored pens, sits a black frame. Inside it, a picture of me and 3 students from the coding workshop. We're sitting on the floor laughing. Someone's sock is mismatched. My hair is out of place. My eyes are almost closed. No one thought to say cheese. The frame used to hold a different photo, one taken on a trip to Michigan when I was 16. We'd gone to visit the lake house of a colleague of my father's. Everyone was in matching navy shirts. Caleb had been named most likely to lead, and my mother made him retake his shot 3 times. I remember standing at the edge of the lawn holding the camera remote. "You're too close to the bush," someone said. "Move left." I moved. But the bush was still there. So was I. In the final print, my face was half covered by a shadow. I didn't throw away the past. I just filed it. Folders labeled by year. Digital photos renamed with neutral titles. 20 to 10. Spring Christmas event Lena. Birthday. Alone. They sit on an external drive in a drawer I no longer open. The drawer with old phone chargers, expired coupons, a receipt for a plane ticket I bought, but never used. Some things don't need deletion, just distance. At Horizon Tech, my office door now bears a new plaque, L. Hartley, UX strategy. When HR processed the change, one of the interns asked, "Are you getting married?" "No." A beat passed. "Oh." Then, "Cool. Cool." Like a wind that no longer chills. My phone buzzed during the Friday staff meeting. A number I didn't save, but one I knew by the rhythm of digits. I let it ring out face down on the table. A minute later, a message, "We noticed your name isn't showing up correctly on the registry. Can you fix it before the wedding? People might ask questions." There was no sign-off. No, "How are you?" No, "We miss you." Just concern for symmetry. I forwarded the message to my archive folder and turned off the screen. That night, I lit the candle Ben gave me for the holidays, the one that smells faintly of pine and something darker like cloves steeped in silence. I sat by the window with a cup of green tea and listened to the wind pass by without urgency. On the coffee table, a small square card rested beneath a paperweight, a personal invitation to join the advisory board of a non-profit that trains young women for careers in tech. They had listed me as Lena Hartley, independent consultant. No one asked about my family. No one asked where I came from. They only asked what I wanted to build next. Claire called again on Sunday. "So, do you feel free now?" I swirled the tea in my cup and watched a stray leaf cling to the rim. "They'll have the wedding. They'll print the program. Caleb will give a speech. They'll probably leave a space open in the group photo. They'll probably fill it." I didn't answer. She waited. "Do you regret it?" "They never saw me anyway. I just stopped standing where they wanted. I kept the envelope receipt from the post office tucked in my journal. Not because I expected to use it again, but because there was something final in holding a number tied to a direction I no longer intended to follow. No fireworks, no curtain drop, just a new name on my mailbox. A name that belonged to me not because someone gave it, but because someone once called it with warmth. The last time my father used my full name, it was on a legal notice requesting cooperation. My new name won't appear on any of those. The last time my mother corrected my outfit, she forgot the color I used to like. The last time Caleb said, "Don't make it about you," I wasn't trying to. I never planned to become someone new. I only stopped waiting to be seen as someone old. Some inheritances don't come with deeds or bank accounts. Some come quietly, shaped like clarity. And I've come to know that silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of needing to explain. I used to wake to silence that pressed against my ribs like a question waiting to be answered. Now I wake because my body is rested. No alert, no obligation. Just the steady warmth of morning sliding along the floorboards I refinished last fall. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep without socks, and my toes curled slightly against the fabric of the quilt. The sun touched the rim of my tea shelf before it touched my skin. I reached for the ceramic kettle with the chip along the handle and filled it halfway. The tap stuttered before running smooth. The mint leaves I bought last week were drying in a glass jar near the window, scent intact. I used 1 spoonful, no honey. The linen napkin beneath my mug wasn't new, but I'd never used it until this year. It had sat folded in a drawer with old letters and utility bills, the embroidery faint at the corners, an H barely visible in grey thread. My grandmother's likely made before arthritis turned her handwriting into shallow waves. I placed it carefully, then set my tea down without a sound. Maple curled on the rug, her chin resting on my ankle, as if anchoring me to the floor. She didn't bark at the trucks today, just sighed once and closed her eyes again. I didn't speak. There was nothing urgent to announce. The newspaper was late, so I read the folded printout left on the counter instead, a typed invitation from the Women in Code Collective. My name was listed as Keynote. Lena Hartley, Independent Design Strategist. No title after it. No credential to explain me. Just the name I now carry like a soft weight, shaped by choice, not birthright. I folded the letter twice, tucked it into a small ceramic dish beside my keys. There was no need to RSVP yet. I would go, but not today. The photograph on the table had curled slightly at the edges, black and white, printed on matte paper. 3 women stood in front of a whiteboard covered in marker dust. I was one of them. My hair frayed at the ends, my shirt not tucked. We all laughed at something unplanned. No one posed, no one corrected lighting. I placed the frame back down, glass side up. I remembered the sound of dress shoes on tile years ago when the family gathered for posed portraits. Instructions delivered like corrections. Stand straighter. Tilt your chin. Smile, but not too wide. I remembered my mother's voice clipped low. Lena, you're in the wrong shade again. There was always a right way to appear, just never a place to be. No one called this morning. The phone blinked only once for a calendar reminder I'd already postponed anniversary Mom and Dad. I left it on snooze. The city outside moved in slow patterns. A jogger passed beneath the window. A couple argued quietly on the sidewalk. A bird landed briefly on the railing and left without marking its visit. I opened the window to let the air in. The hinges squeaked, then settled. The wind didn't ask where I had been. It didn't need to. My cactus sat on the edge of the desk, newly budded. Not in bloom yet. Just the soft swell of green pulling itself forward. I hadn't watered it in 5 days, but the soil was still damp when I pressed a knuckle in. Ben once told me desert plants don't thrive when watched too closely. I hadn't watched it at all, only noticed. Now it rewarded me with a quiet crown. I stirred my tea again, though it didn't need stirring. Maple lifted her head briefly, then lowered it when nothing followed. There are no holidays circled on my wall calendar. No names penciled in. Just blocks of time filled with meals I cook alone and walks I don't announce to anyone. At night, I light one lamp and leave the others off. Not because I'm hiding, because one is enough. There is a shelf of books I've started rereading, books I chose because no one else had claimed them first. On page 212 of one, a character says, "You cannot build a house with borrowed wood and expect to feel at home." I underlined it, not for memory, but for affirmation. When I first moved in, the floors creaked every time I turned in the hallway. Now I walk without noise, not because the wood has changed, because I have. I received a letter from the city last week, something about property taxes and a new neighborhood association. I filed it in the cabinet under Hartley. There was no folder labeled Whitlow. That cabinet doesn't have to explain itself. Claire once asked if I thought I'd ever reconnect. I remember tying my shoelace before answering. I don't think I was ever connected in the way you mean. The clock struck 9, soft and low. Maple shifted. A neighbor started their car 2 buildings down. I didn't wave. No one had asked where I'd gone. No one warned me to stay. No one needed me to dress correctly, speak softly, or apologize for being too tall for the back row. The quiet wasn't punishment. It was permission. I folded the napkin once more, placed it in the drawer between a jar of buttons and a packet of seeds I hadn't yet planted. I washed the mug without soap, let the water rinse what little remained. The steam rose, then disappeared. There was nothing left to return, nothing more to explain. The house did not echo with absence. It settled into presence, and I thought not loudly, not as a declaration, just simply, I am here, not hidden, not waiting, not rehearsing, just living, without having to prove it.